Next, an increasingly popular solution for the many people in big cities who want to live alone. Correspondent Mona Iskander has our story. It first aired on the weekend edition of the NewsHour.
Well, this is a micro loft here in Vancouver. It's about 260 square feet, and everything is really compact. It's got to be multifunctional.
Sean Groff is a 26-year-old employee at Whole Foods who lives in a building that consists solely of what are known as micro apartments.
We're standing in every room. We're standing in my kitchen and my dining room and my living room and my bedroom, and my bathroom's just around the corner. The table comes up.
His dining room table is also his bed.
The whole thing folds down. Just classic Murphy bed style.
For about $950 a month, he learns to make do with his 260 square foot space.
Voila. If I have company and I need another chair, I can use my coffee table again, and they can enjoy as well. This is a solution for people like myself in the stage of my life where I don't have that many things and I don't feel like I need that much space. I'm not really home that often. You ask yourself what you really need. And if you're honest about that, a lot of things become unnecessary.
He happens to live in Vancouver, Canada, one of the first North American cities to embrace the tiny living concept. But the idea is catching on in a number of cities in the United States as well, like Seattle, San Francisco, New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Providence, and Cleveland. They've all been pursuing projects to develop this new model. It's an idea that may be new to North America, but countries like Japan have for years looked to microapartments as a solution to high urban density.
There's very little housing restrictions in Tokyo, so the housing really does correspond with the population need.
Sarah Watson is the deputy director of a nonprofit research group in New York, the Citizens Housing and Planning Council. For the last 5 years, the organization has been studying new concepts in housing. Watson says the number of people living by themselves in the United States has increased dramatically. In the 40s and 50s, it was less than 10%. Today, that population is closer to 30%. People are getting married later, getting divorced at higher rates than they once did, and are living longer. And Watson says the supply of housing for single people hasn't kept up with this changing demographic.
If the population changes, but there's not housing supply to follow, what happens is people start going underground and living informally. And that's why you see this huge growth in the Craigslist market, people trying to make room in housing stock that's not designed for it.
And the problem is only going to get worse. For instance, New York's population is expected to rise by approximately 600,000 people by the year 2030. That's about an 8% increase.
We can't just keep building taller buildings, so there has to be some new ways to accommodate these people within it. So this whole space is 325 square foot.
So her organization lobbied to convince Mayor Michael Bloomberg's administration to consider new types of housing in New York, including microapartments, like this one on display at a recent exhibit at the Museum of the City of New York.
The shelf stays horizontal. You don't even have to clear your books.
This is, for big cities, particularly cities that attract young people, going to be a very big problem coming down the road. And this is the first step that we're taking to try to find a solution.
In a city where space is at a premium, Mayor Bloomberg launched a pilot project to be developed on city-owned land on Manhattan's East Side. Each of the 55 prefab units will be housed in a single building, and each will be less than 400 square feet. In order to do that, Mayor Bloomberg said he would waive zoning regulations put in place in the 1980s to protect against overcrowding. Construction is set to begin this December or January.
So it's basically an experiment.
Right. It's an experiment, and the city's using it to properly test what happens if you just relieve a few elements, a few controls, really to see what the options could be.
New York's micro-unit building will require that 40% of the units are rented at an affordable rate. This being New York, the word affordable is relative. The rent for those tiny subsidized apartments will be between $940 and $1,800 a month. That's actually quite low for the neighborhood.
This, for many cities, is a selling point.
John Infranca is a law professor at Suffolk University in Boston who studies affordable housing and land use policy.
I think it's good for cities in terms of being able to retain young professionals, recent college graduates who might otherwise be priced out of the city, and that'll add a certain dynamism to the city. Boston, for instance, is really pushing that front, that they want to retain their recent graduates who otherwise can't afford to live there. And those graduates are going to be important for the city's broader economy to grow.
But there has been backlash. In Seattle, community groups have voiced concerns that these units crowd too many people together and that they make neighborhoods less stable as young people come and go. In Vancouver, critics worry that microapartments will replace housing for the poor. For example, the apartment building where Sean Groff lives used to be a single-room occupancy building. Locals complained its residents were being forced onto the street.
I mean, critics say that these are really geared towards young, high-income people who are moving to the city for the first time. It's not really addressing the needs of lower middle-income workers who also need the housing.
A lot of these pilots that are happening in cities are definitely on the higher end because they're happening in high-value areas. But we believe if you could really think through the design concepts of these small spaces and situate them in other locations, you're really changing the price point for that. And you can target different populations. We have a small one-drawer dishwasher.
And Watson believes micro-units make sense for the way many people live today.
There's a reason why this is catching on in the country because, you can live quite comfortably now with your music collection and your books all on a very tiny laptop. I mean, it's actually transformed our need for space in the last 5 years, technology. So you couple that with new transformable furniture, and you can really maximize a small space in a positive way.
You can find that story and all of the PBS NewsHour Weekend signature segments on our website.